Good evening, my friend. I'm glad you're here tonight. Maybe you're listening from your kitchen with the lights turned low, or maybe you're out there in the quiet of your car, just letting the hum of the engine keep you company. Wherever you are, I hope this moment feels like a soft chair, a warm drink, and someone across the table who isn't in a hurry. Because that's what I want this space to be, a place where the truth can sit between us, without judgment. The letter I'm holding tonight, it's not easy to read. It comes from a woman who has carried something for decades, not in her hands, but here, in her chest. A thing she wishes she could undo. But time doesn't give us that gift. She writes about a man, a teacher, who once stood at the front of a small classroom, chalk dust on his fingers, his voice calm and steady as he guided young minds. He was her teacher, and one sentence she spoke, when she was only a little girl, changed his life forever. She says she didn't understand back then how her words could harm, but harm came all the same. And tonight, she hopes her truth might still find its way to him, or at least to someone who remembers. So, if you're ready, let's open her letter together. She calls it, "The Childhood Words That Changed My Teacher's Life Forever." I'm writing this from a small apartment far from home. Maybe you know the feeling, how a place you left can still breathe inside you. Sometimes, late at night, I catch the smell of chalk dust mixed with that sharp scent of floor polish, and suddenly, I'm back in the red brick school with paint peeling from the windows. I hear the wooden stairs creak under our little shoes, the bell, slightly off-key, ringing across the playground, and your classroom, at the far end of the corridor, where sunlight didn't just shine, it poured in, stretching across the floor in golden ribbons. I remember stepping into that light, hearing the hum of the ceiling fan, and you, looking up from your desk, calling my name like it mattered. I didn't know then that a name could be a gift, or a wall, that where your eyes landed could make someone feel safe, or invisible. I was 8. I thought love was attention, and when you praised someone else, it stung. One day, I let that hurt speak, with words I didn't understand could change a life. It was a rainy afternoon, the sky the color of old tin, the windows trembling with the wind. We were restless, pencils tapping, chairs scraping. You moved between rows, voice calm like rain on the roof. You stopped beside Emily, her math sheet crumpled in frustration. I watched the way you bent down, hand light on her desk, voice lowered so only she could hear. Something twisted in my chest. Jealousy, though I didn't know the word. It just felt like being pushed to the edge of the circle. At recess, I sat with 2 classmates under the wet smell of the covered walkway, and I told them, "You had touched Emily in a way you shouldn't have." I can't even remember where the thought came from, only that their eyes widened and I felt noticed. I didn't understand the fire I'd lit, that whispers could become storms. I only knew that for a moment, I was at the center again. If I could go back, I'd take those words back 1,000 times. But once a lie breathes, it lives on its own. The next morning, everything felt different. The hallways buzzed, but not with the usual chatter. It was quieter, a strange, heavy quiet, like before a storm. I saw 2 teachers standing by the office, voices low, eyes flicking toward your classroom door. When you walked past, one of them stepped back, as if the air around you had changed. You didn't look at me, not once. Your shoulders were pulled tight, your jaw set like stone. That light I'd always seen in your eyes, it was gone. I didn't understand the weight pressing on you, didn't know that adults could be hurt by words from a child. I thought it was just a story. But that day, when the principal called you into his office and the door closed behind you, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't before. Guilt. Small, but sharp. It should have stopped me, but I was 8, and I didn't know that lies don't stay small. By the end of the week, you were gone from the classroom. A substitute teacher stood at your desk, submission through unfamiliar lesson plans. Your chair was empty. The coffee mug with the blue rim, gone. The small plant by the window, gone. Only a faint smell of your cologne lingered, mixed with the scent of dust and old paper. At recess, I overheard my parents whispering by the kitchen sink. Your name, the word accusation, and my own name tangled in their hushed tones. My stomach tightened, but I didn't speak. The following Monday, the principal told the class you wouldn't be returning. He didn't explain. He didn't have to. The room felt colder. I watched the dust swirl in the sunlight where you used to stand, and for the first time, I felt the hole you left behind. I thought you'd come back. I thought things would return to normal. But some things, once broken, don't go back.
A few days later, I passed by the staff parking lot and noticed your old blue sedan was gone. The spot where it used to be sat empty, the painted lines fading under the sun. It was strange how something as small as an empty parking space could make the truth feel heavier. I remembered the mornings when you'd step out of that car balancing your coffee mug and a stack of books, your tie slightly crooked, your smile quick but warm. Now, nothing. Just the distant hum of the street beyond the fence. At home, my mother asked me if I had told anyone something about you. Her eyes searched mine, and I lied again. Said no. Said I didn't know what she was talking about. I told myself it was better this way, that the less I said, the sooner it would fade. But deep down I knew the storm had already broken, and nothing could stop it now. That night I heard my father on the phone, his voice low, saying your name again and again. And every time he said it, my chest felt tighter. Then, it happened quietly. One morning you were simply gone from town. No announcement, no goodbye. People said your family had packed up in the middle of the night. The moving truck came after dark. No one saw you leave. By the time the sun rose, your house sat empty, curtains drawn, yard gates swinging in the wind. I rode my bike past that house. It smelled like rain on pavement, but the windows reflected nothing, like they were already forgetting. I stopped at the edge of the driveway, gripping the handlebars so tight my knuckles hurt. I wanted to knock, to see you step outside, to say something, anything that could take my words back. But the driveway stayed empty, and I pedaled away, not knowing that I'd never see you again. I thought the lie would disappear with you, but it didn't. It stayed. It stayed in me. Weeks passed, but your absence never softened. The classroom felt wrong. The walls seemed closer, the air heavier. The substitute teacher tried, her voice cheerful, hands moving quickly across the chalkboard, but there was no warmth behind her eyes. The ceiling fan still hummed, but it didn't sound the same. Sometimes I would glance at the doorway expecting you to walk in, tie askew, coffee in hand, but the doorway stayed empty. In the lunchroom, kids whispered about you. Some said you'd moved to another school, others said worse. I didn't correct them. I didn't say a word. And every time I stayed silent, the guilt dug a little deeper. Even then I could feel it, the first roots of something I'd carry for years. But I was still too young to name it. The seasons changed. Leaves fell, snow came, and still, no sign of you. One winter morning, as frost curled on the edges of the window, I overheard two parents talking in the hallway. They said your name with a softness, a kind of pity, that made my stomach twist. One of them mentioned how hard it must have been for you, having to leave everything behind, how the accusations had followed you, even when you weren't here to answer them. That was the first time I realized the lie I told wasn't just a moment, it was a shadow that had chased you out of the only life you'd built here. I thought of your family, of the kids you wouldn't teach, the mornings without your coffee mug on the desk, all because an 8-year-old wanted to be seen. I'd never felt smaller in my life.
As I grew older, the memory didn't fade. If anything, it became sharper, like a photograph that never blurs. I could still see your handwriting on the board, the way you wrote my name in careful letters. I could still hear your laugh when one of us made a silly mistake. Those sounds stayed, but now they carried an ache. At family gatherings, someone would mention a teacher from the past, and your name would try to rise to my lips, but I would swallow it, along with the truth. I wondered if you were happy somewhere else, if you found a school that welcomed you, or if the whisper of my lie followed you into every new room. The weight of not knowing was its own punishment. It reminded me that sometimes the damage we do isn't loud, it's quiet, but it lasts longer. and I had no way to take it back. There were days, especially in high school, when I would pass a man on the street and for a moment think it might be you. One time I saw a figure in a bookstore, tall, coat collar turned up, flipping through a worn paperback. My heart jumped, but when he turned, his face was not yours. Each false recognition was like a reminder of how far you'd gone, how unreachable you'd become. I began to write letters in my head, things I would say if I saw you, how I would explain the truth, the small, selfish thought that had grown into something monstrous. But I never wrote them down. Maybe I was afraid of the silence that might follow if they never reached you. Or maybe I knew no letter could undo what had already been done. By the time I left for college, the town felt smaller than ever. Every corner held a memory. Some I wanted to keep, others I wished I could burn away. There was the old oak tree near the playground where you used to stand during recess, watching to make sure we played fair. I remember the crunch of gravel under your shoes as you walked toward a group of us, the scent of autumn leaves clinging to your coat. Now that same tree felt like a witness to everything I'd done. It stood there silent, while I avoided looking at it. The night before I left, I rode my bike past your old house. The windows were still dark, the yard overgrown, the air thick with the smell of damp earth. It struck me then, you might never come back, not just to the house, but to the life you had before, and I was part of the reason why. College was supposed to be a fresh start, new faces, new streets, no ghosts. But ghosts don't care about geography. They follow you, curling up in the quiet corners of your mind. Sometimes it was the sound of chalk on a blackboard in a lecture hall. Sometimes just the faint cologne of an older professor passing by. Each time my chest would tighten, and I'd be back in that small-town classroom, watching you smile at someone else, feeling that childish sting, and knowing what came after. I made friends, went to parties, lived the life I thought I wanted, but the lie was always there, like a thread I couldn't cut. It wasn't guilt in the way people imagine. It was heavier, quieter, like carrying a stone in your pocket every day, and I knew I'd carry it for the rest of my life. One spring afternoon, I came back to visit my parents. The town hadn't changed much. Same narrow streets, same faded shop signs. Walking past the school, I noticed the paint peeling worse than before. The swing set still groaned when the wind moved it, and the air smelled faintly of cut grass mixed with the dust from the playground. Through the fence, I could see kids running where we once had. It was strange how they had no idea of the story that lived in those walls. For a moment, I imagined seeing you there, maybe older, maybe changed, but still holding that clipboard in one hand. Instead, there was only a stranger with a whistle around his neck, calling out names I didn't know. And I realized I might never know yours again. That night, I sat in my old bedroom, listening to the rain against the roof. The sound was almost identical to the days in your classroom when storms rolled in. I remembered you pausing mid-lesson, glancing at the windows and saying, "Listen, isn't that beautiful?" We'd all fall silent, and for a moment it felt like the world was smaller, safer. It hit me. You were one of the few adults who made space for stillness, and I destroyed that space. I tried searching for you online once, typed your name into that white search bar, hands trembling just a little. A few results came up, none of them you. One was a man in another state smiling in a family photo. Another was an obituary for someone 10 years older than you. Each click was a small blow. The uncertainty felt like an ocean, too wide to swim across, too deep to see the bottom. I even called the school office pretending to be a former student wanting to send a thank you note. But the secretary just said, "Oh, he moved away years ago. No forwarding address." Her voice was polite, but it closed a door I'd hoped to keep open, and I realized finding you might be impossible. Still, I carried the idea of apologizing like a small flame cupped in my hands. It flickered, but it never went out. Sometimes I'd picture it, me standing in front of you, my voice shaking as I told you the truth. I'd see the light above us buzz faintly, hear the hum of a heater in the corner, feel the rough fabric of my sleeve as I twisted it nervously. In those daydreams, you didn't yell, you didn't turn away, you just listened. Maybe it was wishful thinking, or maybe I knew you were the kind of person who would want to understand, even if you couldn't forgive. But I never found out, because the chance never came, and the years kept moving.
Life has a way of stacking new layers over old wounds. Jobs, bills, relationships, they pile up until you almost believe the past is buried. But some nights, when the streets were quiet and the only sound was a distant train, I'd find myself back in that classroom. The smell of chalk dust, the faint creak of the floorboards, the way your tie always hung just a little crooked. Those details stayed with me, even as everything else changed, and with them came the reminder that I had taken something from you that could never be replaced. The thought made my chest ache, because I had started it, and I had no way to undo it. It wasn't until years later that I fully understood the reach of a lie. I was working in a small office then, and one rumor about a co-worker spread like wildfire. I watched the way people's eyes changed when they spoke to him. I heard the laughter that wasn't friendly, the whispered conversations that stopped whenever he entered the room. And it hit me. That was what I had done to you. Except in your case, it wasn't just a job on the line. It was your name, your standing, your life in that town. I went home that night, sat on my couch in the dim light, and let the truth sink in deeper than it ever had before. Regret isn't just about wishing the past were different. It's about living with the knowledge that you were someone's breaking point, and I was yours. Sometimes I wonder what those first days were like for you after the accusation, how quickly the air must have changed when you walked into a room. Maybe your colleagues stopped meeting your eyes. Maybe the parents you used to greet kept their distance. I imagine the way the hallways echoed differently, the faint scent of disinfectant sharper, colder, other, like the building itself wanted you gone. And then the children. Did they whisper? Did they look away? Even the ones who once ran to you at recess. I'll never know all the details, but I know the pattern, because I've seen it happen to others, and I was the cause when it happened to you. It's a bitter thing, realizing your younger self could be so careless and still cause damage that lasts decades, damage you can't ever take back. I sometimes imagine that if we had met years later, things might have been different. If I'd been old enough to understand the weight of my words, maybe you would have been that same teacher with the crooked tie, but I would have been a student who appreciated your kindness instead of resenting the attention you gave others. We might have talked after class. I could have told you about feeling left out, and you might have found a way to make me feel seen. But we never got that version of the story. We only got the one where I let jealousy turn into something far more dangerous, and the world didn't stop to correct it. It just moved on, leaving the wreckage behind. Leaving you behind. There's a part of me that still hopes you somehow knew I didn't understand what I was doing, that I was a child grasping for attention in the worst way possible. But hope doesn't erase the truth. I can still see that day, your shoulders a little lower, your voice quieter when you addressed the class. The chalk dust clung to your sleeve like it didn't want to let go. I wonder if that was the moment you realized your career here was over. The sound of my lie would have been louder than anything else. And I wish I could go back and put my hand on your desk, look you in the eye and tell you the truth before it was too late. Because the truth could have saved you. But I chose silence. When I think about the day you left town, I picture it like a film. You, packing boxes into the back of a truck, the cardboard edges scraping your hands. Your wife might have stood on the porch, arms crossed against the chill, while neighbors peeked through curtains but didn't step outside. The smell of exhaust in the air as the engine idled, and the weight of every unspoken word filling the space between you and them. I wasn't there. I didn't see it happen. But I've built the image from the pieces I do know, and it's heavier enough to haunt me like a memory. Because whether or not I watched it, I caused it. And that truth doesn't fade. I've often thought about how your life might have unfolded afterward. Did you find another school that would hire you? Or did the shadow of my words follow you into every interview room? I imagine you sitting across from a principal, answering questions with that steady voice you always had, while wondering if they'd already heard the rumor. Maybe they noticed the way you hesitated before shaking hands, as if guarding yourself from another false claim. The thought alone makes my stomach tighten, because I know how hard it is to build trust and how quickly it can be destroyed. And you had to start over, not because of something you did, but because of something I invented. It's a truth that keeps me awake more nights than I can count, because I didn't just hurt you once. I set something in motion that hurt you again and again. There's a certain cruelty in how childhood mistakes can ripple through an entire lifetime. When we're young, we don't measure the weight of what we say.
I only knew I felt left out, invisible. I didn't know that making myself the center of attention would push someone else to the very edges of their life. If I could speak to that little girl now, I'd tell her, no momentary comfort is worth another person's dignity. No fleeting sympathy is worth someone's name. But she's gone, and I'm left carrying the consequences of her choices, my choices. The worst part is, it took losing you to make me grow up, and that is a debt I can never repay. As the years passed, the town itself seemed to change shape in my memory. The streets where I once walked to school felt narrower, the houses smaller, the colors more faded. But there's one corner I can't erase, the bend in the road where the schoolyard fence ended. From there I used to watch you leave in the afternoons, your briefcase in hand, your steps measured, as if the day's weight was something you carried home with you. Now that image holds more meaning. I realize those measured steps might have been the careful pacing of a man trying not to break in public. It's a cruel thing, how hindsight sharpens details you once thought were unimportant. And every time I replay it, I wish I could step into that memory, run to you, and take the words back before they settled into your life like a stain. But the past does not bargain. I left the town too, though for very different reasons. I thought distance might ease the guilt, but guilt travels light. In every new place I lived, I'd see faces that reminded me of you. A man at a bus stop with that same gentle slump of the shoulders. A teacher at a bookstore, explaining something patiently to a child. Even the smell of old paper and chalk in a library could send me spiraling back. It was as if the world refused to let me forget the debt I owed you. And so, instead of fading, the guilt became a companion, a quiet shadow, always at the edge of my days. I learned to live with it, but I never stopped wishing for a chance to look you in the eye again, to tell you the truth, and my regret, in my own voice.
I've searched for you in quiet ways. Not the kind that would make the papers, but the kind you carry in your heart. I've asked a few old classmates, written to the school district, even scrolled through community boards online, hoping your name might appear. But there was nothing. Just silence. Like you had been folded out of the world. Part of me fears you've changed your name to escape the weight of mine, that even my search might bring back pain you worked so hard to bury. So I stopped looking in public places at the truth I needed to face. Because maybe this letter isn't for finding you. Maybe it's the only way I can release the words I should have spoken years ago, before they sink any deeper into my soul. If you could hear me now, I'd want you to know that I see you differently. Not just as the teacher who stood at the blackboard, but as a man who carried more grace than I ever understood. I remember the way you smiled when a child finally solved a problem. The way you'd straighten the books on your desk before leaving for the day. The smell of chalk dust and coffee that seemed to follow you like a quiet signature. Back then, I thought those things were ordinary. Now I know they were the markers of someone who cared deeply about the world around him. And I can't believe I turned that goodness into something ugly. That's the truth I carry. Not to punish myself, but to make sure I never forget the cost of thoughtless words, especially when they're aimed at a good man. I don't know if you're still alive. The years have a way of slipping past while we're busy counting other things. Sometimes I picture you older, your hair silvered, your hands still carrying that same steady calm as you water a garden or read quietly by a window. Other times I'm haunted by the thought that my apology might be too late, that the only place I could speak to you now would be a quiet graveyard, standing before a name carved into stone. And if that day ever comes, I'll still speak, because the truth doesn't lose its weight just because the person we owe it to can't hear it anymore. But I hope, more than anything, that you're somewhere warm, surrounded by kindness, and that the shadow I cast has long since faded, even if mine never will. So this is what I want to leave you with, whether you read it or not. I am sorry, not the kind of sorry that's polite, or the kind that fades after a week, but the kind that sits in your chest and changes the way you live, the kind that makes you speak more carefully, listen more closely, and see the fragility in every human face. If I could give back what I took from you, I would. But all I can give now is this truth, written plainly, without excuses, without asking for anything in return. You deserved better than the little girl I was, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to be the kind of person who would have defended you. Because the least I can do is never make that mistake again. Not with anyone, not ever. Tonight's story was a letter sent back to the past,
But it is also a reminder to all of us that sometimes a single careless sentence can alter the course of someone's life. The writer of this letter has carried that regret for an entire lifetime, all because, as a child, she didn't yet understand the weight of the words she spoke. I don't know if the teacher in this story will ever hear these lines, but I believe that simply having the courage to write them is already a step toward lightening her heart. Thank you for listening tonight. If you are hearing this somewhere, remember, always take a moment before you speak, because once words leave your lips,